What's with procedural generation? Procedural generation is the process of a computer, rather than a person, creating information and data. We're most familiar with seeing this occur in games that create a world or environment for the player to navigate. Games like Minecraft and most modern roguelikes create the world as you progress through it. This allows for potentially permanent exploration no matter how long you play the game. Other games like Animal Crossing create a new world upon starting the game and allow you to keep the same world for the rest of the game. While exploration is finite in these types of games, it benefits in that instead players can become attached to a world that was designed personally for them and is theirs alone. We like to think of procedural generation as automated world building, but the definition isn't restricted to environmental development. For example, in the Diablo games, sometimes you might find an item whose stats and names would be created upon finding it. When you find these types of items, a few random processes are executed. First, the game picks an item type, then it picks a keyword. Then it picks another keyword that doesn't contradict or repeat the first keyword. The final item is then named as such. These keywords influence the various stat boosts that the items give you. In just a moment, the game randomly created a new item from scratch. If procedural generation is so random, how come games still make sense? Wouldn't we expect to see huge messes of worlds in games like Minecraft? Well, it would be misleading to refer to this type of data creation as random. Games with procedural generation have to be properly built so that they're still playable. If it was completely random, Minecraft worlds wouldn't be able to work, as blocks could be placed just about anywhere. Just like with the Diablo items, there's a set of instructions taken in a specific order that dictate how procedural generation works. Minecraft creates a world by first creating a height map. Then, based on this, the map is given a temperature. As you explore the world, the game makes sure that world development is consistent with heights and temperature relative to the rest of the world you're in. It's obviously a lot more complex than that, but the main idea still stands, that procedural generation isn't quite random. It's a lot smarter than that. Some procedural generation is even smarter, relying on more dynamic gameplay elements. A prime example of this is the AI director in the Left 4 Dead series. The game has an AI that keeps track of variables and influences small features of the world as you play. For example, this cemetery acts as a maze with a random solution on each playthrough. The solution is determined based on how the players are doing. If they're doing well, the maze will typically be harder, whereas if they're doing poorly, the maze will usually be easier. Again, it's not restricted to world creation. If the players are low on health, the director may spawn a medkit along the path. This sort of procedural generation is interesting because the factors it uses to compute and generate are based primarily on player input. Procedural generation has become a prominent feature of the modern gaming industry. A lot of new indie games have expanded upon this feature. Why is that? It's probably because procedural generation adds replayability to games, and it's easy to see why this is. After all, if a game manages to provide a different experience to players on subsequent playthroughs, it won't feel as stale. It feels fresh to experience something new every time you play a game. Even some of the best games in the world get old after a while. Does this mean that procedurally generated games are better than other games? Well, no. Of course not. Perhaps procedurally generated games have more replayability, but they can suffer from the fact that they aren't hand-designed. Think about the puzzles in Portal. These levels have been meticulously designed to teach the player the core mechanics of the game. A computer probably wouldn't be able to design a puzzle based on the actions and thoughts of the player. Maybe it's cheesy to put it this way, but a computer can't put the same thought into level design that a human can. Sure, we can design the procedural generators to always produce pre-designed elements, but this starts to blur the definition of procedural generation. However, revisiting a hand-designed game usually isn't as fun as your first time through it. You just played this game, and now you're going through all the steps again. This is often made worse by some games that give you power-ups as you go through. Replaying these types of games often forces you to start from scratch, making the player feel restricted in their abilities. Procedurally generated games don't always have to worry about this. Multiple playthroughs of these types of games are typically just as fun, if not more fun, on subsequent games. To put it more simply, a game that was hand-designed typically provides players with a richer, more impactful experience on their first time playing it, but a procedurally generated game loses less of that impact when played again. So what's the point? Procedural generation is a trait that many games feature at least a little bit of. While usually associated with world creation, it can exist in other areas of games as well. It's usually thought of as a random process, but it's actually very dependent on a collection of hidden variables. Procedural generation works best for games like Minecraft, in which the world doesn't need to cater to giving the player any specific direction. Although they aren't always designed in a traditional sense, these games have a tendency to stand the test of time and overuse. And that's what's with procedural generation.